Hello and welcome to Simon Says Artwork. In this video I'm going to be doing another drawing on the A1 paper. This is going to be a life drawing session, but I've already done several drawings on the page and we're just going to join in on one which I did, and I'll talk you through all of the different decisions that I made as I did the drawing. So okay, let's take a look. Okay, for this session I am now on my fourth drawing on this page, as you can see. Now for the first drawing, I don't know if you can tell, this is the one in the top right hand corner. I drew a box within the box, and that's just because I realized after doing the drawing that that's where the image is cropped. And then on the second drawing there was not enough opportunity for me to get in much of the background detail, all the details on the back, the rendering and the shadow that I try and capture, because I like to render some of the detail there, but I'm not really familiar with enough of the muscles and the structure of the body in order to put those in without really keen observation. So that's where that one's really lacking a lot of detail. And then on the third one I went in with a toned graphite block. I like that one, but I left it quite loose, as you can see. Sometimes you just run out of time and you just have to leave it where it is. But for the whole page, I think it's quite interesting because of the boxes. It just seems to add a bit of interest as far as how they relate to each other on the page. Now for this fourth drawing, it's less of a life model pose and it's more of a portrait pose. The model decides to do this sometimes because it does vary up what you're concentrating on and how you're studying the image. I think it's a really interesting way of changing up the session a bit. What she decides to do is to do a close-up pose so that the image is cropped and you only have certain shapes and forms to try to render. And that's what I'm doing here in the bottom right. I'm using the charcoal sticks, which I like to use for this type of a drawing. And I have 3, which go from soft to medium to hard. And this hard one, which I'm using at the moment, does lighter marks, and then the softer does darker marks. So I start off with the hard charcoal stick, because that way I can just plot out some of the markers of the face before I commit to the darker lines. This pose which I'm drawing at the moment is one where the model has her face resting in the palms of her hands. I think it's a really nice pose, and it immediately makes certain shapes which are really interesting and makes the drawing stand out from a standard straight on drawing of a face. Because the head is tilted down slightly, it suggests a certain mood to the drawing as well, and suggests that the model is contemplating something. That's always nice when you can look at a drawing and you can interpret a feeling from the subject. I think that's really an interesting thing to capture. I take my time initially because I'm not sure about where I want things to sit on the page. So I make darker marks where I'm more confident, and then wispy lines where I'm still uncertain. And that's the mark there of a wisp of the hair coming down. I used to use a lot of different separate pages for these sessions and would draw on toned paper and large paper and then A4 and just go through sheets and sheets. And then I developed an interest in this A1 presentation pad because you can balance several images on one sheet. I also have toned paper that I like to use for these sessions because I just think it's got a more interesting balance afterwards of having the different poses and positions instead of having separate pieces of paper. To capture one session in several images and those several images being balanced on one sheet is just a bit more engaging, I suppose, for me personally at least. I'm drawing a basic shape for the hand here. The hand is a very complicated shape, so I do like to box out a more basic image initially. So you can see it's got squared off edges and it's just more of an early marks which I'm making to try and box out where the shape is and block out a certain area where I think the hands are covering. The way that I approach hands is I try to avoid the lighter areas, so that's why I'm creating big boxy shapes. That way you can go in afterwards and apply shadow to the darker areas and mid-tone, and then if you view it as an abstract shape as opposed to the fingers, the knuckles, the hands, the veins, and all of these complicated aspects of a hand, if instead you just see it as this abstract form and render little bits at a time, but make sure that you're considering the whole shape along the way so that you don't get carried away and lose the form, you will just find that you have a better looking drawing of a hand than what you would have had if you tried to draw all the details straight away. So I always initially dance around it a bit. Now at this stage I'm trying to impose the parameters of the screen because this is an online session. So there's certain cropping which is applied or enforced, and that's how this page is being developed. I use the shoulder as a marker for one side of the cropping, as you can see, and then the top of the head for where it's cropped off. And then I try to create the box within which I see the subject. This is now where I'm trying to consider where the hair falls, and then go into the hands afterwards. It's a delicate balancing act to try to get these things so that you think you've done them justice. And you should be hard on yourself in one way to try and improve, but not too hard on yourself that you are afraid to go ahead and try these things. They're very difficult, and making mistakes is how you learn. I like the shape that I've done on the wrist where you can see there is either a watch or some sort of a wristband. It makes interesting shapes, and that's the type of thing that I'll try to remember for drawings from imagination in the future. I think it's the relation between the wristband and then the sleeve as it falls. Now you can see, because I was lacking a bit of confidence as far as the angle, I drew a horizontal line through the eyes. That's something which I remember doing in the session, and it was a point where I just thought I can't continue with this without enforcing certain lines to make sure that I've got a slight tilt to the face, but it's very subtle. It's something which I try to avoid doing, but if I'm feeling that impulsive that I need to reassure myself about certain angles and certain alignments, then I will just draw the line through. and not hesitate to sabotage the drawing in that way. And then straight away, I'll go in with the darker marks. I know that at some point I'm going to be running out of time, so I try to start rendering the shadow before I run out of time. There's a lot of detail here which I still haven't captured because I've spent so much time drawing the lighter marks. So now's the time to get in the detail and the shadow in order to define the image. The good thing is with these charcoal sticks, you can hold them sideways and get flat shading, and that's what I'm doing there. I know that I'm in the way a little bit here, but you can see the little bit which I've done on the top left corner, that I was holding it flat and rubbing it along quite lightly in order to get mid-tone shadow which is textured. That's what I really like about using this charcoal stick set, is that even though the paper is smooth because it's a presentation pad, when you hold the stick sideways it has a lot of texture to it, and it's a sort of a mottled shading that it adds. And then if you apply pressure, it becomes a lot darker, as you can see there on the hair. The mottled shading, I think, adds a lot of atmosphere, and that's really a quality which is hard to replicate without using materials like this. Trying to make good decisions as quickly as possible. Now that I have all of the markers in, it's just checking and double checking where I see certain strengths of tone, which just means how dark do the darks go in that spot, and if it's a mid-tone, is it a light mid-tone or a darker mid-tone. You don't get the opportunity to do especially sensitive rendering in these sessions unless you're very quick, and I'm still fairly slow, so that's why I have to try and catch up towards the end, which is where I am now. You can see how nice that shadow is. It's sort of a cloudy shadow or just dark patch, which you can go back into to create even darker shadow, or you can leave as it is, which makes it sort of smoky and misty. When added to more delicate lines, it just looks really interesting. It gives a quality to the drawing. So if you take your time on certain elements of the pose to make sure that you're happy with the proportions, then you can go a little bit looser and have a bit more fun with the rendering, which is what I'm doing here. Adding a layer of mid-tone to the majority of the areas which don't have light affecting them, and then applying a darker shadow to impose the light source upon the subject. It's quite effective, especially when you've had the opportunity to really go in and spend some time doing it. Now, I quite like how this one develops. I think these looser approaches can be quite charming, even though I do appreciate a more careful and finer rendering. I do think that these looser shading, if it's controlled, even though it looks chaotic, it can be quite effective. Then for the lips, I have to pick up and use one of the ends of the charcoal stick because they're so narrow, and it's important to get a balance and to ensure that the top lip is given more shadow than the bottom lip, if that is the case, which it normally is, but then that the bottom lip is given a certain amount of tone as well, and then that you try to describe light off the lips. And if you're keeping it loose, that can be a really delicate balance. So that's all I'm trying to do there. It's the same around the light side of the face. If the shadow is on the other side, then the mid-tone that you're trying to render on the light side of the face becomes very delicate. And on the shadow side, it's slightly less delicate because you can add a mid-tone to that side and then go back in to make sure that you heighten certain parts of the face which will have more shadow, like the eye socket. Certain things which I'm trying here, I'm not sure if they'll work, like trying to hold the stick flat in order to get the lines for the fingers. Makes them look a little bit more stick-like than what fingers are, but I'm just experimenting. I'm not familiar enough with these materials or with this subject as I need to be. Or perhaps I'm just lacking confidence really, and I need to start to try and commit to certain decisions and see them through. As I said, with the shading on the clothes, you can go back in and suggest certain creases or collars, and that always adds to the detail. When you have shadow, it doesn't mean that it has to be block and filled with one tone. It's always nice to go in and show details within shadow. Again, trying to do a bit more on the hands and to show some sort of impression of where the light source is. But it's very delicate. It takes a little bit more time than everything else. It's unfortunate that I did the horizontal line through the eyes, but I don't think it detracts as much. That's the charcoal sticks which I'm using there. Nice and small so that they're easy to grip and control, a lot more than the chunkier blocks that I used for the third drawing on the left. So those can get some detail, and you can also cover quite a bit of surface area when you hold them flat and push them and drag them along. Just leaves a nice quality to the finish. As far as that page goes, I do think that drawing stands out as quite atmospheric. Has a certain mood to the pose. It looks like I'm going in with an eraser there to try and remove certain bits which I think are detracting, such as the horizontal line. So if you do have an eraser, you do have the opportunity to pull back certain lines. So there, it's not as much harm done as I initially thought. And that's as far as I get within the time that we were given. Now these are the images from the session. I have the first image where it's a nice contemplative pose. And then the third image, which I think is really quite nice, even though it's very loose. This one that you've watched me draw here, and then the entire page where they're all balanced together. And that's as far as I get. Okay, so that's the drawing done. I thought it was quite interesting to try and talk about the decisions I was making at the time, because I was trying to think on the fly. I never get to plan these things out or have any kind of strategy in mind. I just try to do it, in the session at the actual point where I'm making these decisions. I try to sort of, balance it out and correct any mistakes that I'm making at the time. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then please leave a like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell, and I will see you in the next video.